Hello, Blue Jays fans, and welcome back to the Jays from the Couch radio podcast. We've got episode 331. After a little break, we're back and better than ever. We've got an interesting, kind of unique little episode for you this week. We're going to dive into the mental side of being a Blue Jays fan. Lord knows so far in this 2023 season, it's been up and down and all over the place, and it is messing with us. So we're going to dive into all of the different angles of what it means to be a Blue Jays fan in here and in here. To help me do all of that, of course, I've got the usual cast of characters. We've got host of the On Feck Circle, excuse me, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the Feckless Wonder himself, Steve Feck. Good evening, sir. How are you doing?
Good evening, Shaun. We haven't been doing shows the last couple of Mondays. Who have I been talking to the last couple of
weeks? Lord knows, buddy.
Yeah, that's a little disturbing. I mean, it shouldn't surprise you and Karen that I'm doing a show and there's nobody there and there's no camera or anything, but yeah.
Well, you're doing a lot of shows, actually. You've got your Central Intelligence, your NL Central show over at the OK Baseball podcast presented by Slasher Sports. You're keeping yourself busy. Maybe that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, but I was talking Blue Jays. They didn't do divisional realignment that I wasn't aware of, right? So yeah. Okay.
Well, I can't help you. I tried, but
I appreciate
anyway.
It, yeah.
All right, and of course, host of Sunny Side of the Dome Thursdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the one and only Karen Suter. Good evening, Karen.
Good evening, Shaun. Good evening, Steve.
All right. So first of all, we've got like I said, it's an interesting episode this week in that we're going to kind of eschew our normal schedule. We usually have our MLB Minute where we discuss the goings on around Major League Baseball. And then, of course, we always wrap up with our fake news. Today, we're going to just this is getting it back to basics, essentially. This is what Jays from the Couch was about when we first started. It was a bunch of friends sitting around talking about the Blue Jays, and that's what we're going to kind of do today. We took a bit of a hiatus, and I guess before I continue, Karen and Steve have been an amazing support for me. The hiatus is all on me. It's my own personal hiatus. I needed to take a break, step back from things for a little bit. I was getting overwhelmed with all of the tasks on my plate. It was kind of full, and it was affecting me in a way I didn't really enjoy. Let's just put it that way. And so kind of take a step back, clear my head, get my head right, as I say, and then get back on the horse. And here we are on the horse. And I think that part of that, part of the reason for our hiatus is a good place to start today's show. And I wanted to kind of, just before we get into what it means to be a fan of the Blue Jays, we here at Jays from the Couch, whether it's Ryan Mueller and his minor league recaps or Bob Ritchie and his, his deep dives, doing analytics like nobody else out there, or Jim, or Karen and her Sunny Side of the Dome, and Steve with the On Feck Circle. Everybody here does this because we truly are passionate about the Toronto Blue Jays, and we've kind of taken that passion to another level, right? And to cover and write about and talk about and broadcast about the Toronto Blue Jays. And with that comes it's a whole new ball game. And I think that's kind of where I wanted to start with today. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of talk about, first of all, what is the mental side of covering the Toronto Blue Jays? Because I'll open, I guess, the discussion up, and I'll just say that I became what was a hobby and a passion quickly became a job and a slog, trying to compete for eyeballs and look at how much Blue Jays coverage there is out there, and trying to, stay at the top of all of the lists, so to speak. It's exhausting, especially when you branch out into YouTube and, trying to maintain and grow the YouTube channel and all of that stuff. It's a whole lot of work. And I don't know that people who download the audio podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever, or even watching this show here on Facebook or Twitter, I don't think that they necessarily can see what goes on behind the scenes. And my full-time job is a teacher. I teach grade 9 English, and so kind of like doing this on nights and weekends, and it just became something that it was more of an obsessive kind of need to produce, as opposed to kind of approaching it like a fan would. And I think that's where I'd kind of like to start here. And Steve, maybe we'll start with you, because you've been around the game of baseball for a very long time. And I don't mean that, I know that you you retired before Babe Ruth hit his first home run, but
well,
in
his
all
first home run as
seriousness,
a Yankee. Let's be fair. Okay,
true,
I was still actively covering the Boston Red Sox when he was still a pitcher. But
right.
once he went to the Yankees, so really, I retired after he became a Yankee and hit his first home run.
There you go. And I know, but all joking aside, Steve, you have been involved in the game of baseball for such a long time, and I guess when you you've been in kind of the scouting role and all of that stuff, but this kind of role, how do you kind of maintain your focus and drive and passion without letting it slip like I did into this kind of work, I guess, is for lack of a better term?
Well, I think, I've been doing this sort of type of thing since I was a little kid. I used to stutter really, really bad. Really bad. And a teacher knew I was a big sports fanatic, and I played, little league and soccer and all kind of different sports or whatever. And because I had that passion, she used to give me the sports page. And she used to have me say, okay, I want you to talk into the tape recorder. Tape recorders, for those of you that don't remember, it's like a little square or rectangular kind of thing, and you push a button and it records. It's not all this digital hocus pocus crap that we do now. But so I would literally read the newspaper into the microphone. So I sort of was always doing this kind of show. I have a radio background. That was one of my degrees in college, was in journalism and communications. I've been blessed to have opportunities. I covered high school sports, specifically women's high school sports, starting when I was 16 years old. So for me, it's almost second nature. I don't look at it as a job, even when I'm on a deadline. For me, it's just what I've always done. And real life kind of took me away from it. And then the only good thing about COVID-19 was that I connected with you guys, because we thought the Blue Jays were going to play in Pittsburgh. And I just reached out and said, hey, if you ever need somebody on the ground here in Pittsburgh while the Jays are playing here, let me know. And then it just turned into all this.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, it's Shaun's fault that I all my foolishness. Just to be fair, okay. I spew the foolishness, but it's Shaun's fault for putting it out there.
I don't know what to say to that. Karen, when you
Hello.
So Karen, you're somebody who, and anybody who watches Sunny Side of the Dome will know this right away. Very, very knowledgeable about the Toronto Blue Jays, and you know what you're talking about. You know your stuff, and you've been a fan for quite a while now. And so, how did you finally make that jump from being passionate and a fan of the Toronto Blue Jays to now writing about it and talking about it on your own show?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Way back when I was in high school, and of course, when people are back in high school, one of the things they're trying to figure out is what do they want to do with their life, job-wise, career-wise, and so forth. And I had a few different interests, and writing, journalism was one of them. And I seriously considered, and I was considered to go to university. The journalism program at Carleton is supposed to be pretty good. But again, life got in the way. I've been on my own since I was 18. My mom died when I was 16. And some difficult stuff. So I ended up career-wise going in a different path. And all of this predates the love that I have for the Toronto Blue Jays, because that didn't begin in earnest until 1992, when I attended a game with my father, my family, that, to be honest, when the offer was presented to me, inside my head, I wasn't all that enthused, but I didn't want to be rude to my father. So I thought, okay, well, let's go to this game. And sitting there watching that game, I was bitten by the Blue Jay, the baseball bug. And that's been it for me ever since. And then it just sort of things sort of came up here and there when I got into Twitter, and I saw an ad here and there about websites. Well, the first one actually, well, was a while back. And it was someone looking for content writing about the Toronto Blue Jays, and I wrote, I can't even remember the name of the website now. I think they're now defunct, but I wrote about 3 articles about the Jays, and I enjoyed doing it. And then I did something else before coming to Jays from the Couch, but it's kind of putting the two together. I enjoy writing and communicating in that way, and I've come to really love the Toronto Blue Jays, and putting them both together, it's great. Even though I never ended up doing this for a career, and the more I learn about the professional side of journalism, it's probably better for me that I didn't. That there's a lot of pitfalls to it, unfortunately, and in so many ways that we don't have enough time to cover. But
Mhm.
I think I'm happy with the profession that I have, and doing this as a hobby, something that I enjoy. And so,
So
yes, it was.
I wanted to ask you each a question, but before we do, there's a comment here from Rachel watching on Facebook, and I'm sharing this because it that actually means a lot to me, that Rachel reached out. Can I be honest? First of all, always. Secondly, I only got back into the Blue Jays and baseball, for that matter, because I enjoy Jays from the Couch. You should all be very proud of the joy you bring to some of us. Much love to you all. Rachel, thank you. You have no idea, as the founder and the guy responsible for Jays from the Couch. You have no idea how much that means, and the fact that Rachel trusts us to have her child Lawson on,
On site.
talking Blue Jays with Steve on the OnFX circle. That's a big compliment right there, and that means a lot. Thank you, Rachel. So try and maintain my composure here. So, Steve, before you, what goes through your head when you're preparing for a show, or you're about to, you've got a great idea for a piece of writing, or a show even, and then you're kind of mulling that idea over in your head. Like, how does the mental side of that come into play for you?
Um, I, usually I just say things, or I just write. In the past, that's what I did. But since I came here to Jays from the Couch and covering the Blue Jays, I think there's a difference between covering sports in general or teams in general. Like you referenced me doing the NL Central podcast over at OK Baseball. That's 5 teams, and even though one is a hometown team, I don't really have a lot of emotion invested in that. Whereas here with the Jays, I mean, especially being an American Blue Jay fan, and it's not like I'm in a border town. Like when I lived in Western New York, okay, you can understand why I'd be a Blue Jay fan. Or if you're in Seattle or Minnesota or Detroit, it makes sense. Or even up in New England, but I've always felt like I'm sort of like an outlier. So I find that I maybe either overthink or I try to take a little bit more caution. I know that it's going to surprise a lot of people that listen to me on a regular basis, but I actually do to kind of try to take a little caution because I have to be cognizant of the fact that I'm an American. And to add to that woe, I'm an American that grew up in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. So everything is negative automatically. You just so I mean, it doesn't matter. Hey, how are you today? Oh yeah, it's your fault. Oh, sorry. Okay. You know, so I think sometimes I kill ideas, or I don't really go where my heart and mind is telling me, because I try to be more conscious the Canadian consciousness and the Canadian, uh, I don't want to say way of life, but I mean, I think that there is a cultural difference specifically between not only Canada and the U.S., but Ontario, and let's say Western Canada or Ontario and New York City or Boston or Philly. I mean, it's a totally different ball game there. So I think that's where I think I get myself in trouble because I let it build up, and then you've experienced my meltdowns here, on the podcast, or had to watch me in the shows, and then it gets so much. I'm like, it all comes out. So it's been that's been the really big challenge. It's been a fun challenge, but that's the challenge for me because I have to. We talked about views and readership and things like that. I understand that quite often my shows that I would ordinarily do are not going to necessarily play well within the Blue Jays fan base. It's just how it is. It's not a personal attack on me. It's just what our audience is looking for.
And I've always told you, like, I want Steve to be Steve, right? And I've always said just be yourself, like, because that's the best. That's when we're at our best. And it's really funny because I often have that hard time accepting that myself. In fact, that's kind of part of what became so overwhelming was the excuse me, the constant need. First of all, got to keep churning content, right? Got to keep pushing stuff out, pushing stuff out, pushing stuff out. Because if you don't, then the website itself kind of slides down, and then and then it's difficult to build that back up again. And then it becomes about the audience, and then on top of that, Karen, you have the audience reaction to whatever you produce, right? And that can be in and of itself, that can be maybe even a deterrent sometimes from producing anything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, depending what it is, I know of the three of us here, I don't know how much the audience is aware, but I have by far the least experience doing anything journalistic, whether it's writing, podcasting, or anything like that. And I suffer from enough self-doubt. I mean, if I can, I don't want to say too much, but let the audience in on a tiny bit of what goes on behind the scenes. So we have our own chat room, all of the writers, and one of the things we do if somebody has an idea for an article is, well, right, I'm thinking about writing a piece on blah, blah, blah. A big part of that, of course, is we don't want to duplicate each other's work. But I just, reading that, and certain writers will say, I might do a piece on such and such, and then it's ready later that day. And I envy that so much because when I myself am writing something, it takes me quite a while. And that is because I sit down and I write, and I don't know how many revisions I do on average, but as I'm doing it, I am bothered not as much as I used to be, but that there's still this nagging voice in the back of my head that says, is this really good enough? Is this really good enough? Are people going to read this? Like, what the heck am I doing here? And then it sort of struck me the first few times that I wrote something and it was published. And then what I do, as much as is possible, I go back and read my own work, trying to do it from the lens of this isn't me. I'm reading somebody else's work that I know nothing about, and it always kind of struck me, my goodness, this comes across better than I feared it might. So yeah, there's that, and I very much enjoy doing the show. I mean, I don't know how long it was when I was doing it before I finally stopped feeling like an absolute nervous wreck from start to finish. I just, I kept stuttering and tripping over my words, and nothing was coming out the way I wanted it to. I was making on-air blunders, and I was just such a nervous wreck, and was afraid it was coming on across the way I was feeling. And then to go back and watch a little bit of myself, it's like, okay, that doesn't look as bad as I feared it did. But
Hmm.
yeah, you're, as my mother used to say, you're your own worst critic.
Yes, 100%. And I've to the point where I actually don't listen to the podcast after the fact. After after it's out there for the rest of the world, I stay far away from it. I don't watch the YouTube stuff because that's in the whole other layer of self doubt, right? When you can see yourself, that's a whole other ball game. So I actually don't do that, and I don't read anything that I've written previously, unless like a typo is pointed out to me or something like that. Then I'll go back and I'll obviously have to fix it. But yeah, I tend to, once it's out there for the world, I tend to not look at it at all for that very reason. Because well, then I'll want to change like three of the whole paragraphs and or something like that, and then, but the other side of that too is that there's this thing, and I don't know if our listeners would be aware, but there's this thing where they say you never ever read the comments in the comment section, and generally speaking, I don't like that because part of what I wanted to create here at Jays from the Couch was a place where not only we put out the ideas or whatever, but then everybody else can kind of chime in and weigh in. And as Steve will always say, it's a conversation. We got to keep that conversation going, which you can do. P.S. In our Blue Jays Talk for All Facebook group. Join today. Facebook, look up Jays from the Couch, JFTC, Blue Jays Talk for All. Join today, and we've got our game chats and things like that. It's a lot of fun. We'll post funny stuff, interesting stuff, and whatnot there. So look us up and join today. But that's what the comment section is for, and so it's tough, right? Because you want to keep that going, but then also like some of the comments are, we got people who they may never say a word for 3 months, and then their entire comment is you misspelled Guerrero, like thanks sport, thanks for coming out, like stuff like that, or you don't get any comments at all, and then it's kind of deflating as well, right? And so there's a whole kind of like heaviness to it that kind of, for me anyway, I'm only speaking for myself, that became overwhelming. The pressure to produce, and then what happens after you produce. Well, first of all, you got to keep going, you got to keep producing more, and then you're just producing stuff that you're not really happy with either, right? Because it just becomes the content churn, as it were. So the other one of the biggest things that people tend to argue over, when it comes to baseball in particular, is this idea of analytics versus the eye test, and they're that's the only way I can think of to describe them, but they are complete polar opposites, right? You're either an analytics person or you're an eye test person, and never the two shall meet there, and and then there's the people who are like so thoroughly entrenched in analytics that they can kind of respond to things in a way that, again, speaking for myself, that I kind of like, I can't compete in a sense. You know what I mean? Like they're playing a game at a different level than I am, and then they'll come up with their conclusion, and then I'm like, okay, that's a good, sure. I can't say you're wrong because I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. When you start using I'm not a complete. I'm not completely unaware or not used to using analytics, but it can be overwhelming because there's just so much, and then you can nitpick and pick one metric to suit your purposes in this moment. The next moment you pick another metric, but then on the flip side, the eye test people, are so adamant that Bo Bichette makes an error and therefore he needs to be DFA'd, because my eye test told me that he's horrible at shortstop. Things like that like you just can't argue with, because it's so it's so they're so adamant about what they've seen with their eye. So Steve, I know you are very much, you're somebody who kind of tries to avoid the analytics. I would it be fair to say you're a kind of a back of the baseball card kind of guy, and the standard metrics, but you put more stock in, and I've heard you talk about it a lot with pitchers' deliveries or guys their stance at the plate and their swing and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
So is that fair to say that you have certain metrics that you're okay with, but it's not the be all end all?
Well, I mean, analytics, especially in the beginning. I mean, I was probably more a believer like when Bill James came out and people like Clay Dreslow and other people were developing even like games, based on analytical kind of things. But at the end of the day, they there's nobody at MLB that then looks at the game results and says, well, okay, this game was played at Rogers Center, but the 30, the aggregate 30 ballpark factor here would really mean that the Blue Jays didn't score 4 runs in that seventh inning. They really only scored 2.4 runs. So really, even though at the end of the game the Blue Jays beat the Yankees 6-5, really the Yankees beat the Blue Jays 4.76 whatever to pi 3.14 blah 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 blah. That's my problem with analytics once the season begins. Okay, because
Right.
analytics has nothing to do with what is happening in a game result. What you see in a box score, that is it.
Mhm.
You can use analytics to say, okay, gee, why is Dalton Varsho, well, of course it's better now, but why was he hitting under 120 at the Rogers Center? You can take a look at different things and say, okay, maybe this kind of explains that. Why did Vladimir Guerrero Jr. only hit his first home run at home just this past week? You can look at analytics to kind of get a feel for why that is, but ultimately the bottom line is Dalton Varsho hit under 120 at Rogers Center up until the last 2 weeks. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. did not hit a home run at Rogers Center until last week. Nothing changes that. Nothing
At
changes.
all.
Yeah, right. That's just a fact. So I don't want to hear about, well, weighted run created. You don't need to, in anything in life, you don't need to weight it. You don't need to create it. You don't need to adjust it. Life is life. Results are results. You can go back and look and have moral discussions or societal discussions after the fact. But bottom line is, it doesn't change that this thing happened.
Mm-hmm. Or didn't happen in the case of Vladdy, and still not
Right.
right. Like, but there may be a metric that says he's ready to break out, and by the next road or home stand, he will hit his first home run. Like, you know. But Karen, like, so let's go to this whole discussion, because I think like you are somebody who has said that you're trying to learn all of the ins and outs of the analytics, and it's overwhelming. There's so much out there. So Karen, and you are also somebody who is on Twitter quite often at Karen Suter One. How does somebody who's trying to learn the metrics and the analytics navigate the cesspool that is Twitter and all the conversations that go on there with regard to the Toronto Blue Jays? How do you do it, Karen?
Oh God, I don't even know half the time. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot about analytics that I don't understand. There's a lot that I feel that I have learned, so that's great. There's tons more out there that I really don't know anything about. But I mean, I guess to me, there's so many different ways of looking at it, and I think they're all valid to a point, but I don't believe that any one method is it. It is
Mhm.
the Bible, is the be all and end all for 100% of the situations. So I mean, when in 2020, when there wasn't a heck of a lot else to do, I read a few baseball books. Well, one of them that I read was Buck Martinez's book. I believe it's called Change Up, And he was talking about this very issue. He said, I've never said that I think analytics is bad. I think it's very useful. I think it helps enhance the understanding of the game, but it's not the only tool. It shouldn't be the only tool. Some people treat it like it is or should be the only tool, and that's what he really doesn't agree with. And I agree with him about that. That it's the eyeball test. It's if a manager knows their players getting an instinct, and do I feel, even if he's been slumping, is he ready to break out, knowing things that are going on behind the seats, or behind the scenes, excuse me. But yeah, things like that. So yeah, the whole thing can really be a challenge, and sometimes I find, particularly on Twitter, some people can be so very negative, and depending on the vibe I'm getting from them, if I think they're going to listen, I might try reasoning with someone. I might, excuse me, I might try saying, well, I see it this way for these reasons, and see if they're willing to consider that. And if someone annoys me enough, I mean, there are options. There's keep scrolling, mute, unfollow, block. If you've had enough of someone, see you
Right.
later.
And it's sad that that's like the mental side. If we want to talk about the mental side of being a fan, it's like that whole social media interaction thing is a big part of that. It's like we've almost forgotten that to be kind to each other, because like we all are people. And it sounds so cheesy and corny, like I'm talking to some my 6-year old about how we still, we're kind to everybody, we respect everybody and all of that stuff, and yet we have grown ass adults who can't use a social media app properly for the very same reasons. And it becomes a this game of one-upmanship, right? You have to be right. Everybody has to be right, and if you're not right, then you hear it from every corner. But the problem is, Steve, is that there is no right, because that is your opinion. It's not your correct. It's not a fact. It's your opinion. If you think Vladdy's going to hit a home run next week because he seems to be hitting the ball harder, or his launch angle has changed over the last month of the season, and he's due whatever, those are still your opinions, right? But we've lost sight of that, Steve. That with baseball and all the million different ways you can look at it and analyze it, there are also that many different opinions, but not that many facts.
Absolutely. And actually, again, you and Karen are aware that I do teach and have been involved in 12-step recovery and, help programs, for decades now. And I really think that for some people, there needs to be a different kind of AA. There needs to be an analytics anonymous. I mean, because really, analytics make you into a lazy fan. This is my opinion. But it's easy to go look something up and say, oh, see, Adam Simber needs to be DFA'd, or whatever player you want to take. Dalton Varsho stinks. He's a bum. We didn't get anything back in the Marino Lourdes deal. It's easy because you're looking at these analytic numbers, and people look at them and say, well, this is based on a scientific kind of formula, so it must be right. People aren't actually watching what's happening in the game. They're looking at that numbers, and that is now forming their opinion and their approach and how they're entering conversations. I mean, I don't do it as much because unfortunately, you can really get someone, you could, not knowing, you can hurt them, you can get them really riled up. But certainly in the beginning, when I first came on board here, I was the guy on social media and in the comment section of everything that was deliberately, poking the bear. Because I knew, I mean, inherently, when you cut through everything else, take off the tie, the Blue Jays cap, I'm a jerk. I don't mean to be a jerk. I'm just very good at being a jerk. So, so having that base instinct, I was able to really get people going. I mean, the running joke with us was always Tanner Roark and Randall Grichuk. And I would wait for just the right moment to just drop China Roark's name or drop Randall Grichuk's name, and then people would just go absolutely, bananas over it. I mean, did I like Tanner Roark? Yes, I did. I still think Randall Grichuk would have been a great fit on this kind of a roster that we have, but he's not here anymore. So you got to just kind of move on. But that's my problem with the analytics things, and it's not that people need to take a class to use analytics, but they still have to watch the game. And as Karen referred to with Buck's book, but even Buck Martinez, you hear him. I see him a lot because just about every U.S. based show talks about it brings in Buck Martinez. If it's the Blue Jays, it's Buck Martinez. It's just how it is. Maybe Dan Schulman, but it's Buck Martinez. You have to ultimately watch the game and look at the final score, and you have to resolve and feel okay. This was the game. Okay, this is the final score. Not the result I wanted, or was it a great result? You can't be looking at numbers and trying to explain things. You just need to accept what the results are, and then try to form opinions and thoughts about what can be done next.
Right. And as you're talking, I think the example that comes to my mind is Alek Manoah. Like, it was very clear over the last few starts, whatever the issue was, and it's very clear to me that based on the decision that they've made, that the Toronto Blue Jays aren't exactly sure what the actual issue is. But what became very clear was that it was obvious he was not going to be effective because he did not look comfortable at all. And you could, the expression on his face, and I think back to guys like Ricky Romero, who's one of my favorites. I loved him, just a bulldog on the mound, but you could tell when he was having a rough outing. It was all over his face. And guys, that is very telling, right? And you don't need any numbers to back that up. You can just, as you say, watch the game, and that's what comes to my mind when you say watch the game. You can tell when somebody's putting together a good at bat, when they feel comfortable, when they're seeing the ball well, all of those things, right? And that can't be measured. If the ball looks like a beach ball coming in, there's no metric for that. That's just a guy who's comfortable and seeing the ball well, right? But all of those things, the front office will pour over spreadsheets, and I just picture one of those old-fashioned printers where the paper was all just still attached and you had to tear it apart, right? And it's just mass producing and shooting out reams and reams and reams of paper, and they're pouring over that stuff, and they use that to make the decisions that they make. And Karen, this is where I'm going to turn to you. And being a fan of the Toronto Blue Jays comes with having to wrap your head and your heart sometimes around some of those decisions that they make. For example, Alek Manoah, or trading away somebody like a Teoscar Hernandez or Lourdes Gurriel, or back when I was in love with Tony Fernandez and Fred McGriff, those were really tough. And I was a teenager then, so obviously more emotional than I am now. But excuse me. But that's the kind of thing that being a fan of the Blue Jays is really hard for some people, right? And Karen, how do you kind of navigate that when you get attached to players as a fan, or even just roster moves in general? I remember for me, one of the biggest, I guess, hardest things for me to come to grips with was the Toronto Blue Jays let Carlos Delgado go. Did not trade him when they could have got something for him, something of value, reflecting the value that he brought to the team. They just let him go. And that to me was like super gut wrenching. I could have even accepted a trade, but they just let him go. So Karen, how do you kind of negotiate or navigate all of that as a fan of this team?
Right. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I've been a diehard since 1992, and I've had various different favorites. And for the purposes of my part of this discussion right now, I'm going to say let's put aside things that we have more recently found out about Roberto Alomar and the kind of person that he is. Just think about what he was like, what little we knew of him, but what a lot that we knew of him as a baseball player. And I'll be very honest, he was my first ever favorite player. And eventually, he was no longer with the Jays. Delgado, absolutely, Pat Henkin, Roy Halladay, and each of those in its own way was very, very, very hard for me to take. And eventually, it's almost like having a death in the family. At first, it's like it's unfathomable. How am I going to continue? And then bit by bit, you accept it and you carry on because you have to. And I mean, I don't sit here today and speak of those things with the same kind of sense of loss as I did when they happened or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. I've come to deal with it, and yet this past off season, it still came back to smack me in the face a couple of times. I didn't see that coming. I knew that both Gurriel and Hernandez were eligible for free agency at the end of this year, and I didn't really think both of them would be back after this year. I thought if anything they would probably choose which one they wanted to keep around more and let the other one walk. But this being a go for it year, I didn't see them trading away players like that. And yeah, I always try to balance what's in here with what's in here. Sometimes the two of them match. Often they're at odds with each other. And but yeah, that's that kind of loss, and twice in one off season. It
Yeah.
was not fun.
And it's interesting, right? Because if you take a step back and look at it from a fan perspective, we're talking about a game, first of all, that we watch for entertainment, right? We watch movies, we watch television shows, and and people will holler and scream on the red carpet, and over Brad Pitt or whoever else is out there, and yet baseball or sports in general is a whole new level of that. The obsession that people have with their sports and their teams and sometimes their players, it's just an indescribable, like, connection that sometimes happens, right, between your team and yourself. But Steve, like, how do you it's just a game, right? It's just a sport. It's just a business, and baseball's a business, and I understand the business of baseball. You hear that a million times, and so on and so on. It'll be the one of the first things that people say when Karen says, "I wish they hadn't traded Teoscar Hernandez." Well, it's a business, and they got a good return, and all of this stuff, and some folks, and I think Steve on your show, Diane was like the first responder that you had on
Mhm.
your show. She said that yes, we love these guys and we cheer for them and all of that stuff, but it's a business and people get traded. It happens. How do we how do we navigate that, like, that connection, that passion that we have with the team and with individual players?
Well, I think it's an individual approach. I don't think that there's a tell all answer with that. I think it's easier for me in a lot of ways because I have coached. Again, not in the major leagues, but I mean, I have coached traveling teams, little league, whatever it would be. You have kids that you just absolutely love. You love. I kid. But come playoff time, that kid might need to sit on the bench in a playoff series if you're really thinking of all the kids on your team and winning a championship, whether it be local or going to the state level or whatever it be, you ultimately have to make the best decision for the team itself. So for me, when I see a Gurriel traded or Hernandez traded, um, I can look at it more logically. I mean, of course, you're going to trade Lourdes Gurriel for Dalton Varsho. It's just how you look at it. Because if you're trying to think a couple steps ahead, Dalton Varsho, ultimately with his defensive prowess, is going to win more games, theoretically now, than Lourdes Gurriel will in a short term, one season deal. And Arizona, even though Gabriel Moreno was everybody was the big deal, I don't think the Diamondbacks make that deal with Varsho just for Moreno straight up or another prospect. They wanted Lourdes Gurriel. I mean, they and Hazen has come out and said that yeah, Lourdes Gurriel has been on our radar for a long time. So I mean, so for me, it's easier. It's also easier for me when it comes to the Blue Jays. Is that up until like this new rev, most people are used to being able to go on the internet and see whatever site you want to go to, get all the up to date type of things. Growing up in the states as a Blue Jay fan, you did I rarely saw the Blue Jays on TV. And even as a kid, I was a junior in high school when the Blue Jays came into existence. But even since then, I'm not going to see them even like once a year, home and away, because I have lived primarily in National League cities. And where I lived when I was living in Western New York, Yankee games and Met games were on. You didn't necessarily, if you had an antenna, maybe you could pull in when they still did over the air games. But so for me, I had to come up with ways to get my information about the Blue Jays. But in the meantime, I'm now seeing a whole other different set of players that people living in American League cities perhaps weren't able to see. So I had a greater appreciation. So when I heard Dalton Varsho for Gurriel and Moreno, I was like, that's awesome. I didn't blink. So I think it's everybody has their own way that they need to find and feel comfortable with appreciating. I think, like you said, Diane Santos, I thought you made a lot of great points about ultimately at the end of the day, when I look at it, it's a business. And I have to, once the player's gone or once the player's failing, I have to know that the axe is coming. And it might come from her training as a first responder or whatever it is. Yes, you want to do everything to save the patient or be able to make an impact. Sometimes you just can't, and you have to accept that. So everybody has to find that safe zone for their fandom and not try to be the fan that Karen is, or a fan that you are, Shaun, or the fan that I am. Please don't be the fan I am, people. Everybody has to find that for themselves. Don't try to be the analytics guy or the eye test guy or whatever it is. Just find the place where you get the most enjoyment and most fulfillment out of rooting for your team.
Right. And I think because it is different for everybody, that's where you're getting all of these different reactions, and in the form of opinions that are called facts. But that's what they are. They're reactions, right? And I think that sometimes, especially in the world we live in now, everything is so divisive, and you're either on this side or that side of everything. And, we're not going to dive directly into the whole Anthony Bass situation. However, it is a kind of an example of just how divisive sports have become now, where politics is starting to seep its way in. But even if we leave aside the political, we've seen this in the past where, particularly with the current management, where people like Roberto Osuna, for whatever reasons, rightly or wrongly, I'm not getting into that debate here and now, but I'm saying that they've been kind of jettisoned elsewhere, as was Marcus Stroman, who wasn't a criminal, wasn't anything that other people have been dismissed for. He was just, for lack of a better word, confident, cocky, abrasive for some people. But even somebody like that has become kind of, there's either one side or the other. Everything has to be I'm right, you're wrong, and anything you say is just stupid and it doesn't make any sense, even if you have facts to back it up, numbers to back it up. As we've already said, sometimes those numbers don't mean anything to me because they're too far above my head, right? But we have I think the biggest issue that we have facing us here, as fans of the Toronto Blue Jays, and it happens everywhere, so I'm not going to kid myself, but is that, Karen, we have to be either right or wrong. And if you are not agreeing with me, then you're wrong. And then I'm going to bring down all holy hell on your head as a result of that. And I think, Karen, that for me is it's the worst part about being a Blue Jays fan is not only people doing it to you, but just watching people do it to each other. Calm, normal, everyday good people go at each other pulling Trevor Richards out of out of his the start is the most important issue facing the human race, and that's what I'm having a hard time, right? Because the part of why I took my hiatus from this was to kind of like focus on that this the baseball's a game. The Blue Jays are a team that plays that game. Covering the Blue Jays is a hobby. It's fun, and it should be fun. It should not be over consuming. And I had to kind of take a step back and kind of appreciate everything else around me for a little bit, right? And Karen, this is I guess when I throw it to you, I'm kind of like, I guess, asking you to chime in on that kind of divisiveness, because you spend a lot of time on Twitter, so you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of people with all kinds of opinions, and as I often say to people, I agree to disagree with you, and that's the way it should be. There's lots of different opinions out there, and it's never going to be the case that everyone always agrees with everyone else about everything. There's always viewpoints, and as mature adults, I mean, we should listen to each other and accept. For the most part, my kind of philosophy of life is anything you do is okay as long as you're not harming others. So if that's not the case, if that's not what we're talking about, then listen to each other, respect each other, agree to disagree. But yeah, there's really a lot of extreme viewpoints out there, and not a lot of room for, okay, I can consider the other side. Maybe you're right about this. I mean, isn't that how, or one of the ways that people learn and grow? Because everyone's got their own ideas, but you know what? Maybe somebody out there has looked at something in a way that you haven't. Maybe you can benefit from just listening and thinking about things in a new way. And yeah, it can
Agreed.
be very tough, and there are times when if an opinion on an issue is one extreme or another, I'm kind of afraid to speak up if I'm somewhere in the middle, because heaven forbid somebody looks at that and absolutely crucifies me for not being 100% where they are.
Hmm. Hmm. And that's exactly yeah. And the problem is that's how our world is right now. It's been like that for a few years now, and it's bleeding into things that are supposed to be fun and enjoyable and entertaining, like covering the Toronto Blue Jays, or being a fan, I should say, of the Toronto Blue Jays. And I guess that's maybe that's a good point to end this on, is just to remind everybody that this is a game, this is fun, remember your passion, remember why you became a fan of the Toronto Blue Jays, and hold on to that tightly, because it's so easy to just kind of let it slip and forget. Go ahead, Steve.
Just real quickly, and it's a theory that I was taught when I was training, in psychology and education as well as journalism in college. But I think it applies across the board, and I call it the 1/3 theory. 1/3 of the people are going to agree with you, no matter they're with you. The other third of the people, no matter what you do, they're not going to agree with you. Whether you're right, whether you can prove what it is, they're not. It's so you need to focus when we're doing a show and we're covering the Toronto Blue Jays, and I'm doing it on Beck Circle. There's going to be people that say, "Boy, I love how Beck is. That's awesome," and then there's people that absolutely hate what I do and how I approach things or whatever it is. I have to I have to acknowledge that they're out there, but I have to kind of block them out because there's a third of the audience out there, or a third of the fan base that either hasn't thought of something or hasn't had facts presented that might support something, and that may actually make them think for themselves. Go and look up the stuff. Don't trust me. I'm a dope. Don't trust me. Go and look up this information and form your own opinions. Okay, so I think that's what ultimately our responsibility is to get people not only to be part of the conversation, but to think for themselves. We have to present things in a professional way, in a factual way as we can, but ultimately we have to try to find a way to reach that third that hasn't made their opinion. Because not only does that build our brand and build our base, but also it helps them become better fans. And that's the responsibility. And there's far too many podcasts and sites out there, not just with the Blue Jays.
Mm.
But I have found certainly with the Blue Jays sites, I think that way too often they do not do that. They're not trying to actually help fans understand or become better fans. They just want to spew whatever it is that they believe.
Right. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, so interesting, Steve. I'm listening to the things you're saying, and for some maybe strange reason, I just had a bit of a flashback to one of my teachers in high school, and this man, I mean, he's very smart man. He was very different. He was very outside the box. At times, he could be very controversial. He would sometimes talk about things that parents didn't want their kids hearing about. But I remember this one particular day, his name was Mr. Clow. And I remember him saying, I don't want you guys going out there, leaving my class and saying, well, this is the way it is because that's what Clow says. I want you to say he's full of crap, but I'm going to find out why. I'm going to go and read and experience and form my own thoughts about things.
Yeah, I actually say the same thing to my students. Like, think for yourself. That's the biggest thing I can ever teach you. And I guess aside from manners, of course, people ask me, "What do you teach?" Manners. I mean English. But but I think like that's the biggest thing, right? Like whatever our opinions are, and if there's one thing we take away from this episode, being a fan of the Toronto Blue Jays, like yes, be a fan, but more than that, be kind, be a human being, because that matters far more than any baseball game. Even if they win the World Series, being kind to each other is far more important than that. So that is what I'm going to, the one takeaway from this episode. Except actually, maybe here's the second takeaway from this episode. Jays from the Couch is a proud supporter of the ALS Society of Canada. We have raised quite a bit of money, not enough. We need your help. We're asking you to help us fight ALS, the terrible, terrible disease. It is a death sentence for anybody who has it. And so please consider donating today. You can make a charitable tax-deductible donation at support.alsevents.ca/Jays from the Couch. We're collecting donations. It's still going. We've made a decent amount that I'm not ashamed of. I'm proud of what we've done, but we can do more. So please consider helping us out. If you would rather get a little something for your money, head over to our Redbubble shop where you can get Jays from the Couch merchandise. There we've got shirts and mugs and all kinds of different merchandise, both for the Jays from the Couch and the Jays from the Couch podcast, for Sunny Side of the Dome, for the OnFX Circle. We've got all kinds of merchandise there. And I will tell you that 100% of the profits, any money that's actually made from this, goes directly to the ALS Society of Canada, so that one day we can say that somebody survived ALS. So please help us out. Consider helping us today. There we go. All right, we are at the end. Episode 331. It was a little bit of a different episode this week, but I think I'll thank Steve and Karen always for joining me, but also for indulging me with this one. I think it was something that I kind of felt I needed to do to get back on that horse, so to speak. But like I said, we're all Blue Jays fans out there. Every single one of you who's watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, or downloading the audio version on Apple, Google, Spotify, we're all Blue Jays fans. That's why you're listening to us right now. Please remember that. Please, please, please remember to be kind to each other. Don't forget the On Fact Circle, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, coming up tomorrow night. Karen's off to Baltimore. I was going to say sunny Baltimore. Hopefully,
it's supposed to be warm, so yeah.
There you go. To watch their Blue Jays play. She might be one of Ron's going, so 2 of the 80 people who are there in attendance. So that'll be good. That's harsh. The Orioles are actually in a better playoff spot than the Blue Jays are right now, so maybe there'll be like 100 people there. But anyway, so no sunny side of the dome this week. So for Steve and Karen, thank you for everybody for tuning in, for the comments and all of that stuff. We really, really do appreciate it. This is Shaun Doyle. You can follow me on Twitter at DoyleJFTC, hoping life gives you a juicy fastball down the middle and you don't miss it. Take care.